The downtown is more or less over and the economy is looking up. That seems to be the message coming out from the economic survey, the report card on the economy which has been tabled in Parliament a short while ago. The survey pegging growth for next fiscal between 6.1 to 6.7%, saying lower inflation will hopefully lead to lower interest rates, which in turn should help boost investment. Let me now introduce our special panel to help analyze the economic survey and also talk about the budget which will be presented by the Finance Minister tomorrow. Kiran, Mazumdar-Shaw, Chairperson of Biocon, joining us from Bangalore. We've got Vivek Dahejia, author of Indianomics, also joins us from Mumbai, and with me here in the Delhi studio, Krishnamurthy Subramaniam from the Indian School of Business, Hyderabad. Thank you all for being with us. Let me go straight across to Kiran Shaw to get a sense of whether 6.1 to 6.7% as a growth target for next fiscal is looking too ambitious given the state of the economy right now.
Well, Shweta, I'm very skeptical about these kind of estimates and forecasts. We've had a number of shots at estimating, growth above 5% in the last several quarters, and it hasn't panned out that way. I think the global headwinds are very strong, and we don't seem to have any policies that seem to counter these headwinds. We're staring at a lot of very alarming kind of set of numbers, starting with the fiscal deficit, which I know that the finance minister is very keen to peg it at kind of 5.1% levels from the current 5.4% levels. We're looking at an alarming increase in current account deficit. We're looking at also additional parliamentary approval for 28,000 crores of additional subsidies on account of our fuel bills. I know that we've taken some measures in terms of increasing our diesel prices and other such attempts at reducing subsidies, but overall I think we need to see far stronger aspects of kickstarting the economy. How are we going to really look at policy measures that really take away from agricultural subsidies, see how we can sort of convert those into credit lines which are really focused on cooperative farming so that you can leverage the benefits of modern technologies through economies of scale. How are you going to kickstart the manufacturing sector? The cost of capital is really unsustainable right now. How are you going to address that? Are you going to give tax holidays for manufacturing? Are you going to give soft loans for manufacturing? What is it that we're trying to do? The whole infrastructure sector is also really crying for capital investment. We need to see strong and consistent policies that drive growth. The investment climate right now in India is not looking so great.
Alright, given that, I also want a quick response from you on tomorrow's budget. It is going to be a very, very critical budget coming at a time when we've seen the economy slowing down to the kind of levels we haven't seen in a decade. At the same time, it is really the last budget before the elections. Do you see Mr. Chidambaram taking a balanced approach between austerity and spending, between taking care of the needs of voters versus investors? Do you see that balance really coming, or do you think he'll clearly pick growth over populism?
I think, knowing Mr. Chidambaram, he is going to focus on growth-oriented measures, and I really hope I'm right on that front. I also believe that we are at a very critical point in our economic development. We keep talking about inclusive economic development, but there are no clear measures of how we are going to do that. And one of the big areas that we really need to focus on is government spending, subsidies, and other such aspects of how do we rein in spends. So I really don't have clear-cut answers, and I'm just hoping Mr. Chidambaram will think innovatively. I know we've been focusing on GST for far too long. Is that going to happen? Is he going to announce that as a done deal or not? We know that a lot of things can actually add to GDP growth. So when we start forecasting 6.1% GDP growth, if we can actually make certain things happen, I think e-governance itself has a huge opportunity to actually add 1% to GDP. Right. But how are we going to deliver on e-governance? Because we really need to make the transactional costs come down. We need to basically reduce the number of approvals that are required to do anything, because that is what is deterring investment.
All right, let me take forward what you've spoken specifically on subsidies and ask Vivek Dahejia as to whether we can look at some innovative way in which we don't end up, the budget doesn't end up looking like one which is clearly cutting down on spending. At the same time, we move forward on the overall task of cutting expenses, because that will be the tough one really for the finance minister here. On one hand, he clearly needs to cut down his expenditure, he needs to trim that ballooning subsidy bill, but at the same time, given the fact that we have our eye on elections, he can't seem to be doing things which clearly will make bad politics. Vivek, your thoughts also given what the economic survey has said on subsidies?
No, absolutely. I mean, I would echo what Kiran has said. Look, I mean, the challenge that the finance minister faces, in a way, and this is sort of paradoxical, is what the rich countries were going through 4 or 5 years ago. They had the challenge of, look, how do we bring back fiscal discipline, fiscal austerity, but yet do that without choking off growth. And as in fact, your question suggests that this is a real paradox, because if he takes the easy way out, and he sort of goes at big chunks of spending that actually give us the springboard for future growth, then in a sense one cuts off that growth at the legs, and that is a really big problem. So how do you tackle difficult subsidies where there's a strong constituency, which are difficult politically? It's a balancing act, and I think it's a very complicated balancing act. And just if I can come back to the eco survey, Shweta, which is what we're talking about today, it's a very rich document. I've just been looking through it, and in a sense the headline bullet that says that downturn is expected to be over, I think disguises the fact that if one reads this document, it's actually pretty candid about the problems we face. I mean, if I can just quote, it says right in the opening chapter, India's situation is difficult, and what is important to recognize is that a lot needs to be done, and the slowdown is a wake-up call to increasing the pace of actions and reforms. And what's striking, if I can just add one more thing on this, the survey says, look, the real litmus test is where are the good jobs for our youth coming from tomorrow? Because these are the sort of people who are kids who are looking for jobs. What are they going to be doing? Are they going to be sitting around twiddling their thumbs? Are they going to be unemployed? Are they going to be unproductively employed? And so the report, if one reads it, really points to some huge structural problems that one doesn't know that the budget will even start to tackle. So I mean that is what one does worry about, Shweta.
Vivek, in fact, I was talking to Krishnamurthy Subramaniam just now about the real focus on jobs in the economic survey. Take us through, Krishnamurthy, some of the critical points that have been mentioned in the economic survey, because this is something that really impacts people. The fact that we're talking about missing jobs, the fact that the slowdown in growth has led to a lot of unemployment and potential jobs not being created.
Yeah, I'm going to come to to what I believe is sort of possibly a game changer, the chapter 2 in the economic survey. Before that, I actually just want to respond on the growth numbers, the projected growth numbers. Sure. Now, Shweta, we have to recognize that projecting the growth rate is a critical element of economic projections, and there is an element of error. I am, though, not as pessimistic
about. Just to interrupt there, the error element we're talking about is, of course, growth projections above 8% levels in last year's economic survey. Now, we're talking about huge element of error out there. It's clearly not mere error.
I agree, but in this time around, I'm actually more optimistic. What has been projected is about 6%. Just to look at the facts, despite the slowdown that we're talking about, last calendar year, 2012, 27 countries grew at a rate more than 7%. And that is something that we have to be cognizant about. So it's not, we don't need a lot of things to come together for the 6% growth rate to be achieved. Remember, we actually have had, robust growth over the last, decade or so. Also, what you have to recognize is that the assumption of 6% or the projection of 6% is based on the assumption that the downturn is over and that the uptick is going to start. And that itself is based on the fact that Q1 and Q2 numbers were 5.3%.
Okay, hold your thought, because I'm going to get Mrs. Shaw to respond to that. Do you share that optimism? Do you think, and 6.1% we're talking is the lower side? The government is already projecting 6.7% as the upside number. Now, Mrs. Shaw, would you agree with the view that Krishnamurthy has just put out? That it won't be so hard to achieve?
It's possible, Shweta. I really don't think it's undoable. I think 6.1 or 6.7% is absolutely something which we can do. But where are the triggers? Where are the policy enablers? Where are we creating real jobs? I mean, all that we are doing is getting into these schemes like NREGA and others, which are just resulting in spending and not really creating real job and real growth. That's what my worry is. I mean, we can keep forecasting and pulling out all kinds of statistics, but my real concern is that we are not creating real jobs and real growth. We need real investment to take place. I can tell you that India Inc. today is not investing enough. Why is that? There is a lack of confidence.
Shweta, I completely agree with what Kiran is saying. In fact, and that's where I think the chapter 2, I'm going to read out something that I think a wise statement out there. The chapter starts with the statement that policymakers are usually focused on short-term measures, but the short-term has to be a bridge to the long run. And this year's economic survey recognizes that if there is an issue that should essentially keep policymakers awake at night and busy in the day, it's about seizing the demographic dividend. Exactly the kind of thing that creating jobs that are productive. So the distinction, there is a distinction implicitly in that chapter 2, which is saying that what we want to create is careers, where there are skills that are developed. We need to move people out of agriculture, which is essentially been unproductive. Also, there's a very nice comparison of other Asian economies that have essentially been growing since their liberalization, at what stages they were and what stage India is. So if you recognize, we've had about 20 years since the reforms, and the projection there is that in the next 10 years we'll have to move about 10% of the jobs out of agriculture into organized industry, into services, and what you find in manufacturing in particular is that the jobs that are being created there are not the ones that are essentially more productive, that employ a lot of skill. And so the chapter 2 lays out a good roadmap of what needs to be done to seize the demographic dividend and ensure that it doesn't turn into a demographic liability.
Okay, Mr. Shaw has a quick point to make. Go ahead, ma'am.
Shweta?
Yeah, I just want to echo and continue with these comments, saying that look, we do need to move these, the fact that 50% of our employment is generated by the agricultural sector,
right,
and the fact that the agricultural sector contributes less than 15% to GDP is really a very, very damning number. Now we need to certainly move these jobs out of this subsistence farming into industry level jobs, but equally I think there needs to be a focus on self-employment and entrepreneurial jobs, because where are you going to create these millions of jobs? I'm not convinced it's going to come from just the traditional or the large scale manufacturing sector. You've got to be able to support entrepreneurship, and there I don't see any policies that are enabling that. Secondly, I also believe that we are losing out on the opportunity to leverage new technologies in agriculture that will take these jobs out of that subsistence farming into industrial jobs. We've got a lot of examples of good technologies that are not being leveraged because there are no economies of scale. And I come back to my point, cooperative farming, where you get large land holdings that can actually leverage technologies very effectively because of economies of scale. I don't see any policies enabling that. That's where I want to see subsidies being coming out of the system and converting those into those kind of credits which allow these kind of cooperative farming to take place.
All right, Vivek, we're running out of time, but closing thoughts from you really on the tough task that lies ahead, and some of the points that the economic survey particularly has raised, creating jobs, containing fiscal deficit, trimming the overall spending. It isn't an easy task ahead for policymakers given the state of the economy right now.
I think, in fact, it's fascinating that all of us here are really fixed on Chapter 2, which I've been reading as well, as the crux of this. I mean, those of us talking about it tomorrow, I think we'll also look back at Chapter 2, because that is the long-term structural challenge. I think if we can put it in two parts, I mean, in the first instance, we've got to sort of stop the fiscal bleeding. And I think that the finance minister will try to do by hook or by crook. But the second question, and this is a good question, is this a roadmap or is this a wish list? Are we going to create the new jobs of tomorrow, and how does one start doing that. And there one is going to have to revisit this question of labor laws. The report actually does deal with it directly. Probably for the first time I've seen so candidly that over-regulation and our arcane labor laws are a problem that have to be tackled. So I mean, I'm hopeful in that sense, but I'm not sure that really apart from sort of tinkering at the fiscal margins, we'll see much progress on the bigger structural challenges tomorrow. But who knows? One might be surprised.
All right, quick point from you. I know you want to say something.
I just want to actually add to what Kiran was saying about the disincentives that exist for entrepreneurship, and the chapter 2 is very candid about all the different sort of roadblocks that exist for a small firm to grow. There is not enough incentive. In fact, there is disincentive. For example, there are service tax exemptions for firms that have revenues less than 10 lakhs, which incentivizes small enterprises to remain of a revenue of less than 10 lakhs. And so, I mean, the report is very candid about all those, including labor laws, and how that essentially keeps people in the unorganized sector. So I think if just that, part of those could essentially be implemented in tomorrow's budget and then a roadmap laid out, I think we'll be done.
All right, a long list clearly out there for the government to achieve. Plenty of challenges. The government knows it has messed up. Growth has slipped badly. It needs to get its fiscal house in order. That's what makes the economic survey and tomorrow's budget so very critical, given the limited time and opportunity that the government really has to bring growth back on track. Many thanks all of you for joining us and sharing your thoughts on the economic survey and the upcoming budget. That's all from me on the business desk. But before we go, let's take a quick look